Well, good morning, good day to everyone that has joined us here today. In this last session of the seminar, How Women Are Affected by the Euro-Mexican Treaty, that is a matter of laying out the various circumstances that we're experiencing in our countries, that's starting on October 6th and then continuing on October 13th, talking about issues of violations of labor rights, both in industry and in agriculture, extractivism, the violation of indigenous people's rights, the damages to the environment, and so on. Now, you will have the floor in order to explain other situations that we are experiencing in our country. We are also grateful for the translation. There is live translation from Spanish to English and vice versa. We're grateful for this participation and to the translators, which makes this communication work possible. This seminar forms part of a campaign that we are conducting to avoid the signing of this global treaty, this global pact between Europe and Mexico. They call it a modernizing, an update to the treaty, but since 1997, and with the commercial ratification of all that is called the Economic Association Agreement, Economic, Political, and Cooperation Agreement, what this agreement has done is favor big transnational corporations from both regions, both in Mexico, both from Mexico and from Europe. And this is what we're trying to make visible. We will continue to do so. We should show these violations. They should be visible, the consequences that we've experienced throughout our country and that the peoples of Europe are also experiencing. So today we will have 4 different great women speaking with us, talking about different circumstances and situations that are being experienced in the present and the efforts being made from civil society and the people to free us of this situation. First, Hazel will make a brief presentation on the agreements from a European perspective. She is an organizer of this seminar. She is based in Europe, in Sweden, for the last 25 years. I hope she won't speak to us in Swedish because we wouldn't understand, but please, welcome. Thank you. Thank you very much, Maria. I'm going to present to you, as Maria said, this is a very brief presentation about the history of conditionality policies with regard to EU agreements. These policies, why are all free trade agreements, why do they all have a clause about human rights and about the democratic features of the countries with whom these treaties are signed? Within these agreements, within the global agreement of the European Union with Mexico, there are 2 very important clauses about human rights and democracy. How were these clauses written in the 1990s? With resolutions since 1991 on the need to include these human rights and democracy clauses in all international cooperation agreements since 1992, in all agreements made by the European community, especially in regard to Eastern Europe, these clauses were inserted into these agreements since 1992 and 93. They become an essential element of these free trade agreements, and this is why it's so important to talk about human rights. They come to have what is called an essential element of these treaties starting in 1992. This is the most powerful tool. They're introduced in Eastern Europe and in other various countries, and there's a discussion about the sanctions when human rights are violated in signatory countries. In the 1990s, there's a flagrant suspicion of the agreement in the case of human rights violations, and this was applied in relations with Albania. Later, a much more flexible conditionality was applied. This talks about sanctionary measures. Starting in 1995, there's greater flexibility in the sanctions placed upon countries that violate human rights and that have agreements with the European Union. But also, there's a questioning of the legality of the inclusion of these clauses in free trade agreement. Once the legality is resolved by the European Court of Justice, which claims that these clauses are valid in all these agreements, but only with developing countries. At the present, these clauses on human rights are considered essential and remain. They are binding. But to the present, the European Union has maintained a position which it calls constructive, and to date, it has not ever used these clauses to lead to a suspension of the agreement. Civil society, both in Europe and in the countries with which Europe has these agreements, have demanded the European Commission to make greater use of these clauses. And here I can include a link with more information about this story. This is very current. I just wanted to highlight that these clauses are extremely important. They form part of all the treaties that the European Union signs with developing countries, whether in South America, Africa, etc. But to date, the sanctions enshrined in these clauses have not ever been used. In the case of Mexico, this relationship with human rights is visible, and we want to present these violations as a violation of the essential clauses of these free trade agreements with the European Union. So that said, I will pass the floor to today's invited guests. We will start with Hazel Davila. I'm also going to include in the chat the link to see the protest letter that our Euro-Mexican network has written against the updating of this treaty, of this agreement. Here's the link to that letter, and I pass you the floor. Thank you, Edme. Please, Hazel will begin these presentations. She is the founder of the collective Embroidery for Peace in Ciudad Juarez. Its objective is to preserve memory and the construction of a collective and citizen memory and accompaniment of those mothers whose daughters have been disappeared. She's a researcher, and she focuses on strategies of demanding accountability with families of the disappeared, as well as forms of organization of women's groups for common causes and social issues. She is in contact with situations of social violence. She's a doctor in social sciences. She has published various publications about the border area between the United States and Mexico. Please, Hassel, go ahead. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to be here with you all. I'm going to briefly show you a PowerPoint. Please give me one moment. Can you see it now? Yes, I think so. So I'm going to try to limit myself to the allotted time. And I'm sorry for any background noise here. Those of you who are Mexican know how much noise is present in our homes. I'm going to very briefly introduce the situation of intense social violence in Mexico generally, and then later focus specifically on Ciudad Juarez. Right now in Mexico, there's a terrible crisis of security present in a large part of the population, among other factors. This has to do with the conflict between cartels on the access to communication and movement throughout the national territory, and the diversification in other illegal activities. This is due in large part to the failed efforts of national security by the President Felipe Calderon, who declared war against narco traffic. Please keep in mind that you are being translated. Should I go more slowly? Yes, please. This strategy had as its principal consequence the increase of extortion, hijacking, kidnapping, murders, and disappearances, and violations of human rights that affected a large part of the civil population. Specifically vulnerable were some groups such as young men, migrant, and women. This final group has been the most grievously affected. The violence against women, especially in murder and sexual violence, has increased alarmingly. This reflects the deep inequalities and systematic discrimination that women experience. At present, we cannot even understand the impact of this failed strategy, which in the end only weakened the civil population. Violence, fruit of this declaration of war, in which the deployment of police and military forces to confront organized crime led to human rights violations among the civil population, in addition to the violence inflicted by the illegal groups. This was focused on certain points in the north of the country, Ciudad Juarez being one of the most intensely affected. This has expanded to almost all of the states of the Mexican Republic. This percentage has been maintained very constantly. It is considered that disappeared persons are 3/4 men and only 1/4 part women. And this percentage has remained stable as long as data are being collected. But if we take into account persons under 18 years of age, women and girls represent 52% of those that have been disappeared. It's important to highlight, and in accord with the UN Women report, the presence of homicides was between, of these, 18,000 murders took place between 2011 and 2017. In the first months of this year, feminicides have increased more than 7% with regard to the same period in the prior year. According to the registers of public security of the first months of the year, I have many doubts regarding the validity of these data, but they are the official data. They're only taking into account when there's clear evidence of sexual violence, but they're not considering other issues of intersectionality associated with gender, or there are not sufficient research to allow us to corroborate this. These contrast with the official data, and they do not allow us to identify a correspondence. We can claim that these, in various states, including Jalisco, Sinaloa, Chiapas, up to 10% in Tijuana, Guadalajara, y Monterrey.
However, most of the institutions and different collectives and groups for organized people, most of them composed by women, have underlined that most of them are happening in the first month of the year. So more than 1,000 homicides, according to the data provided by the INEGI. However, in the public registry published by this institute, it doesn't specify whether they were committed by due to gender issues, but it does determine that more than 70% of them were committed with guns. This increase in homicides shows that the first semester of this year has been the most violent of the last 20 years. Not even in the war against drugs, the figures were so high. So this increase is a consequence of the lack of a good strategy in security. In 2010-2011, homicides with the women increased also, and this trend was reverted by 2016-17, but nowadays in 2022, we know that it has increased already. Also, and even though most of the figures reported by institutions, but the official institutions do not precise whether those homicides are feminicides or not, or violent murders, the last report of the INEGI is confirming that 10 women are murdered every day in Mexico, meaning more than half of them being murdered by their own partners, and 3/4 of them are murdered with guns or are being strangled. Also, most of feminicides are being have completely impunity, violating human rights for the direct and indirect victims of these crimes. We can also state that they are not following the protocols and securities according to disappearances. We need to take into account the general law of disappearance. I might just quote some brief points about it. Article number 5.9, we're talking about the no re-victimization, so the need of applying the measures needed to avoid for the person disappeared and the people related being victimized in any of the forms, and hampering the exercise of their own rights and being exposed to suffer a new harm. And the problem that we have in Mexico is that our legal structure is impeccable, of course. If we go and have a look at the laws, everything is written down. But it is in the theory, but when you're talking about practice, it is very difficult. And we need to have a new review of the articles, because we need to explain all of these features and characteristics. For example, the National Search Commission, so this is information that they gave me in some of the search, have 65 people, only 65. But we are counting secretaries and lawyers and researchers that are working on the field. So only 65 or 35 people in a country with more of hundreds of thousands of people disappearing every year. So it is just impossible to think that we are going to find those people. We have people also dealing with the National Institute for Women. We have 2 women working there. And Mexico can say that they are working on it. But when we are talking practically, on a practical point of view, when we're talking about the work on the field, it is not possible, because we have different dependencies. These structures that at different levels, local, up onto a national level, they are not coordinated, and therefore results are very unlikely to be achieved. And also, according to the law, when we are talking about searching procedures and the evaluation of actions of particular cases, the families have the right to be present. And most of the times they are denied of this right. When we're talking about a gender perspective, a gender approach, it is included in the law, in the forced disciplines law, but we want to also to underline, to stress that we have a protocol for search, and we have data indicating what feminicides and women disappearances. But in Mexico, we do not have a specific search protocol for gender related issues with women. We do not have one for gender related for women. And they are being, they're disappearing and they are being murdered. You have 1 minute left, my dear Hazel. I am sorry. Well, in Ciudad Juarez is famous from 1990, from the 90s, when the media started reporting on feminicides. Although this situation is happening still today with great impunity, but it doesn't happen only in this city. Unfortunately, Ciudad Juarez, it might be a reference because it's one of the first places where there were the first groups organizing themselves, trying to tell the world what was happening in the city. However, the feminicides started long before they were called like this, feminicides. And we have the term of the death women of Ciudad Juarez, and thinking about the gender included in the gender without saying it out loud. But it doesn't reflect the torture, the sexual exploitation and murdering of all these people just for being women. When we're talking about the deaths of Suarez, we are continuing with the stereotypes, denying the situation or minimizing it and making it part of just the common day-to-day. Since it is a great group, we are losing the individuality, but we need to name them one by one, mainly because the figures are increasing day after day, and we need to talk and to speak out about all of these issues, because we have not have enough solidarity, and we have seen also victimizations or denial of the facts, so hampering to have common fronts and to ask for justice for these crimes. So in this context, we have more and more women gathering together and joining new collectives and groups to report and to demand against everything that is happening. So violent deaths due to gender issues of women. And now the current government is insisting on minimizing the facts and trying to criminalize the process of women requesting security measures, guarantees to their rights and access to justice for all of them, especially for their families and families who are living with the disappearance or the murder of one of their daughters. Well, I should stop here since I just run out of time. Thank you very much for listening. Thank you, Hassel. And now, of course, we will have some time to maybe to go deeper and later on. Evangelina, you yes, you joined us already. So she's part of a feminist group from the coast in Michoacan. She is also a researcher for people in this region. So welcome, Evangelina. You're muted, so we cannot hear you.
Gracias, Evangelina. Bienvenida. Muy buenos días y muy buenas tardes.
Thank you. Good. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever you are.
¿Sí me escuchan?
Can you hear me? Yes, of course. So you can start. My name is Magdalena Contreras Teja. I am from Aquila, Michoacán. And I used to live in Caleta de Campos. I used to live there for 20 years. In Lázaro Cárdenas, the 11th of July 2012. So the people from the organized crime arrived there and took my daughter, and therefore she disappeared. Have no news of her since then. And I started creating this group without even knowing that I was creating a group or a collective. I just started talking to people who had someone in their families also disappeared. We were only 3,000 people, more or less, when I started creating this group. Some of them heard of us, some people heard of us and joined us, and we were 30 people with a relative disappeared. From that moment, sorry, that's my phone. Okay, I'm with you. So when this happened, I started looking for help with disappeared people from the colleague Zenaida, but unfortunately he was killed. In 2019, she was murdered 19 July on 2019. And from that point, we started searching all along the coast. Some of the disappeared people that we actually retrieved and found, and the year passed, and the figures started increasing and well, exploding, and also women murders and disappearances too. So the situation right now is that 60% of them are murdered, and sometimes in Samaras or Saguayo, in all these regions, in Hiban, Hakona too, we have 6 or 7 murders of women, and also minors, girls from 13, 14 years old. And it hurts us a lot because also the state and the government is doing nothing at all. When we're talking about this displacement, we have 120 families. We're talking about families and with women, with the girls, with the elder people. We have 130 people, and we're looking a lot of them. A lot of them are missing. I am talking with indigenous communities. I know some families from Chilinguillo, Wawa, all these communities from the Aquila municipality, but I need to go to Chiquinicuela, Calcoman, and also Colima and Guerrero, because we have a lot of people there in Kawayana, and not so many of them in Aquila because they want to go and seek refuge in Kawayana.
Y eso nos ha llevado a hacer un trabajo porque mi hija, si vemos, tiene 10 años desaparecida.
So it's been 10 years since my daughter has been disappeared, and the government has never ever searched for her up until now. And we have seen many other cases such as hers, and the government is doing nothing. And we are sending 10 cases, 10 examples to the UN. They have been accepted, and they are sending the recommendation for the Mexican government. They should be started working. They haven't actually, they already had the first meeting, but we are the families are the ones who need to start pushing them for the urgent measures. Because if they do not do it with us, with the families, I don't know what we're going to do. They have tried to do some search, but they only put the pictures of the photos of the disappearing people on the walls, but they do not do a real search work. And we have 14 different axes, and they are not doing it. And they are only just taking photos all over the cities, but they do not have an interest in working with the families and to work hand in hand, searching for the people who disappeared. Because when they start searching for someone, they don't even tell us in advance. And some of us have, for example, 3 hours of commute to go to the place where they are started searching, and they are bothered because we know more than them. We have more knowledge on search, living search, and if they go out and they go searching, maybe I remember now one day was searching for one colleague. They just searched for 1 hour, just 1 to 3 hours, and they just took a picture and they came back and said, okay, so our work here is done. It was just 1 or 3 hours that we were there, and it wasn't a proper search. And in Michoacan, what we are seeing now is that it's very difficult to start real works because we have a lot of corruption in the government. We have a lot of disappeared people. And also in the lake of Chapala, they found 3 different corpses, 3 bodies, and we started calling people and making calls and trying to reach out for the government to take them out of the water. So one day passed. The second day passed. I met a coordinator, and he told me, I am sorry, Macarena, but we do not want to do it. We cannot take the bodies out. And one of the bodies got lost. 2 of them were found, but they didn't want to look for the third body, the one that got lost due to the waiting. It was like the 3rd of April, I think, but they didn't want to really take the bodies out of the water. They don't want for the people to see that these kind of things happens. And when we find the bodies, maybe in the I don't know, in the countryside or in the water, like this case, sometimes they just throw them to a well, and they will hide the facts from the families. Many of our relatives are in common grounds. In common pits, and sometimes also we have sent them pictures, and thanks to these pictures and the DNA and the images of them, some of the families have been able to retrieve their families, even though the government wanted to throw them to the common pit. So they need to deliver the bodies. And in Morelia, where the attorney is, it's happening too. They prefer to and go to mass and thrown to mass graves instead of delivering the bodies to their families. And Caballana was the worst of the cases because in 2014 we found a mass grave, and some of them told that one of them could be my daughter, and Tony came, took them away. I asked around. They told me that went sent to Morelia, but we never found them. These 2 people, we never found them anywhere, even though we looked for them. They showed me some proofs, but we don't have any data whether it's female or male. Some of them have a seal, but no work at all, and we don't know how to identify them.
They said, this is where they brought them. They have them in funeral boxes. And when those boxes are filled up, they don't take them to graves even. They take them to the municipal dump and burn them. I'm sorry. Sometimes I think that if that was my daughter, I'll never find her again. And this is, if they burn them, then they're not even putting them in a mass grave where there's some chance that we might be able to find them. There's no hope. We could at least find the remains and renounce the hope that they might come back alive. When I asked, what are they doing? Are they working? They said, who told you that? I said, no, I've been looking. They said, go in, see if you find her. But they don't have anything. The books don't have any information. The fragments don't have any information. So how am I going to find my daughter? How am I going to find her where they said I might find her? So we started to take hold of people who had the same problem. And one woman whose son was taken off by the police, he was killed, and they denied it. She had been looking for him for 5 years. They said that they had him, they found him in a mass grave, but they didn't. The next day they said no, that he wasn't there. He was unrecognizable because of the state of decomposition. They said they would find it in 10 days. I think all of us that have worked on this, we know that a body that's been left out for 10 days, it's impossible that they don't find at least some fragments of this body. They must have been out in the country, out in the open, at least a year. They never found the whole body, just little fragments. So all along they were lying. And so they have to tell us the cause of death. The families have the right to know what their family members died of. When they get there, they say that they were going to cremate them, and we said, no, you can't do that because it's a murder. It has to be investigated. You can't burn it. So we're seeing that all of this takes us, I don't know how to say it. I know what I want to say, but I don't know how to say it. I never went to school. I've worked hard. I don't even know how. I've been working with my family and pushing forward this whole initiative. Thanks to my daughter who supports me. She studied. And so we've continued working on this and doing a lot of work on this, trying to at least understand and know what they've done and what they haven't done. This takes a lot of work. For us to go out in the countryside searching, it helps us psychologically more than going to a therapist, because we feel at least we're doing something. In 2016, I have never received any kind of support from the government. It's very difficult, this situation. Seeing my children who are also far away from me, the fact that I'm still looking for my daughter means being busy every single day. accompanying different families and taking them to the public attorney that's responsible for disappeared persons, supporting them in the legal pursuit of human rights, accompanying them and doing follow-up on all of these cases. So it's difficult. It makes me sad. I have grandchildren, but I can't live with them because I want to find my daughter. My kids are grown, they're married, but I can't. Sometimes the babies have a birthday, but I don't go. I can't go because I'm too sad. I don't have the spirit to go to a party. I can't find my daughter. I haven't gotten over it in 10 years, and I don't think I ever will get over it. There were 3 days which I called the operatives. He was recovered alive, but tortured. The state police went. Then they tried to take my other son. They never take him to a police station. They demand a ransom. I said, if you said anything, they would kill us all. It was the state police. And we can't denounce them because we have photos. It was all documented. We documented it ourselves, this whole situation. So we are persecuted because of this work that we're doing. We're constantly under threat. They've threatened me constantly. They wanted to make me sign a paper saying that my daughter was alive or that my daughter was not disappeared. It was the people of the government. They said they would take charge of looking for her. Then they said that she was alive. And I've asked them again and again, where is my daughter? But they continue to doubt my word. It wasn't true. They weren't looking for her. What is the government trying to cover up in the story of my daughter? I don't know. I don't know. They've never given me any complete information. If my daughter's alive, then where? These are things that are confusing and painful. Because if she is alive, where is she? Where do they have her? And why are they covering this up? I'm sorry. This is very painful. It's painful to think of. If you'd like, we can stop for a moment so you can rest, and then you can continue to tell us. This is such a painful situation, but it seems that one is hearing the voices of the mothers of so many states in the Republic, with the local, state, and federal levels of government are all behaving in the same way, leaving people in this situation, leaving all of this in the hands of the women, of the mothers, of the collectives. It's appalling. And these efforts that you've made to connect with each other, to build collectives, to support each other is very important, because it strengthens these situations. This is a call to the whole population, to the whole civil society, to not give up. Any person, any family is under threat and could live this kind of experience. There's a journalist friend who talks about a very grave, serious situation with regard to the disappearances and makes a comparison with other areas in Latin America in terms of the number of disappearances. Says that, for example, in Chile, in times of Pinochet, the dictatorship caused 3,000 disappearances. And in Argentina, under the dictatorship, there were 30,000 disappearances. And the civil war in Guatemala in the 1970s and 80s caused 45,000 disappeared persons. And that the military governments of Colombia left 85,000 disappeared persons over 60 years. And yet, with the data that Hassel has given us, these are data from the mothers of the families of the disappeared. In Mexico, we have over 100,000 disappeared persons in a situation in which officially there is not a war underway. And yet we clearly are experiencing a war in this country, a war against the populations that are victimized, criminalized, when they're searching for their family members, like Evangelina here. So we're going to let Evangelina breathe for a moment and ask Doris Carmona from Educa, Oaxaca, who also belongs to very important women's organizations for the defense of human rights. Please go ahead, Doris. Thank you, Maria. Hello, good day. I think it's good morning here in Mexico, probably in the afternoon for some of you. We wanted to thank you for inviting us to participate in this seminar. Always, these spaces of dialogue and exchange are very important in this context, which surely is not only in Mexico, but is also shared in many other countries. We should say that when I'm going to share is some of the work that we are doing with women to highlight the memory of Betty Carrillo. Our organization is a civil society organization. We've been working for 25 years with communities and villages in southern Mexico, in the state of Oaxaca. And we're also accompanying from here communities and villages that over recent years have been severely affected by extractive projects like mining, hydroelectric projects. I'm sorry for all the noise in this room. There's a logistical issue that's going on just at this moment. I'm sorry. So we're accompanying throughout these regions in the southern part of Mexico, a region that's very important in terms of its natural diversity, its rural life, its social diversity. Faced with this, women and men have a very important cumulative experience in terms of social organization, in intimate relationship with the environment they inhabit. These are two elements that overlap and come into conflict in these spaces. We should also recognize the effort being made, being shared by Hazel and Evangelina. We want to say to Evangelina that we feel her pain. We accompany her in her demand for justice in this country that has such deaths, so many deaths with the victims, with their families, with the villages, with the people, with the women. And so we accompany her in, and we send her a big hug, accompanying her pain and her demand. I'm going to share a presentation that I have here. These are some images that we wanted to share with you today. Like I said, specifically, we were invited to share about Betty Cariño. As the organization Educa, we've been very close to the process of the demand of justice for Betty. Many of our companions here in the organization collaborated or formed part of the processes that accompanied. And here we wanted to show and share. You can see this on the screen, right? This image that you see now is an image from one of our colleagues here in the organization. In a process over the last 2 years, we have been pushing forward this process. We form part of the organization Alforja. We've reflected on the importance of recovering the memory, the contribution, the historical memory of women in the villages and processes, their experiences, their pedagogical and political contributions. In a periodically we discuss and debate, and we have a reflection on the life of Betty Cariño. And what we're sharing here is the result of these reflections. Here in our offices, it's perhaps you're well aware of this information, but Betty Cariño y Giri de Cola were assassinated on April 27th in 2010 when they were undertaking a peace caravan, an observatory of human rights in the autonomous municipality of San Juan Copala in Oaxaca. After the murder of Betty and Giri, there have been a cumulus of violations of human rights. There has been no justice since then for these companions, neither Betty nor Giri. Betty Cariño she was a companion of ours, someone who made a huge contribution. She was an activist, she was a mother, she was a defensor of rights, she was a communicator, she was also a poet. Betty, as I'm sure many of you know, and on the internet there's a lot of material, she was a woman who wrote a lot, right? Lots of poetry, stories, narratives. So I wanted to share here this brief poem called Feeling Oaxaca, which describes she had been doing her work in 2006 in Oaxaca in a political and organizational moment that was very important, very powerful. in terms of the aggressions by the state against a sector of the school, of the teachers' college in Oaxaca, what detonated a response by many people from different sectors around the state in the framework of this aggression, this violation of human rights. These regions and the city, a lot of different events and mobilizations were organized. They took over streets, highways. There was a massive mobilization in 2006 in which Betty Cariña specifically had a particular presence, a very important role.
Para la articulación, la organización, la información.
Articulation and the organization of this activity in other villages for them to know what was happening. So in this poem, she talks about Oaxaca and what does it smell like? Smelling like hope and like something that you have forget to fight and protest. Also to our own food and ingredients on the isthmus and the coast, in the Caucasus, and in your cases too. From Educa, from our organization, we have been really close to this process to demanding justice. During this time, we have seen all the efforts that all the members of the family of Betty and all the communities and other organizations and groups have done. They have done a great work trying to demand justice for Betty and Nick. And Angelina and Hazel have also set the image of what is happening with the Mexican government, because they say that they are doing something, but they are doing nothing for women and for men who are trying to demand justice for their disappeared relatives and disappeared women. From our initiatives, we have created one with this session of women in defense of territory and life. We think that it is very important to retrieve all of the memories and of our colleagues and companions, retrieve their words to gain force and to continue fighting, because they are giving us hope, they are giving us strength to continue, and also to give some warmth to our hearts to be able to continue with the fight. So this session, this journey was very important for us. We talked about Betty Cariño and everything that she gave us as a woman, as a defender, as an advocate for the territory, mother activist. And we invited some colleagues to give some flowers or photos. So you can see now in the picture, this is from our colleagues from the north of the territory, and in our business we did like a small ritual to bring her memory back, because she was very important for us. She fought a lot on the radios and community economy, and she also was a great advocate for the peasants, so both men and women. Also an advocate for the preparation and training of the communities. She was a real model to follow, and that is why we wanted to bring a memory back, also with the education and training programs that she was accompanying. She also wanted for the people to join the forces and to create alliances among them. And you can see some pictures of the ritual and the homage that we wanted to give her. I wanted to say also that in our work in Educa, defending our territories, we are putting the focus too in spirituality, because for us it is a tool, it is a strategy, an element indeed that is important for us, because it's giving us the chance to continue to find strength. We are taking care of each other as a collective, as a group, and we are strengthening each other with many different ways. One of them is rituals and spiritual and mystic activities that is very important for us to defend the territories and women's rights. So here we have different photos and cards for Betty and for Yuri too. And I think that in many parts of the world, we have seen a lot of artistic activities and memorials for Betty and for Yuri. And for example, here we have a graffiti in Oaxaca, in the city, and with a blue sky. And we know that there are a lot of people out there who wants to join our cause to demand justice for Betty. I wanted to share this with you too, because this is an initiative that I find really important from our organizations and the collectives that are accompanying the legal process for Yuri and Betty. So they announced that they are going to present this case in front of the court. From Educa, we are collaborating with them. We are sharing this process and sharing information about it in order to achieve justice for justice for their family. And I remember that the other day someone told me that the attorney Michelle Salas was she was trying to work, because you know, in the Mexican state we have a lot of laws, and Hassel talked about it already, but sometimes it's absurd because the process is the process and there's nothing else to do. That's what they told you. And in some ways the state or the government is becoming an ally to these crimes that are being committed in our territories. This attitude of doing something or not doing something, who is not being in favor of the victims, but of the people committing the crimes. So here you can see some documents that are already uploaded on the internet. So this is a document from our initiatives. We are gathering and remembering the story of Betty and 5 other stories. And what we want with this document is to take back and to remember the stories and everything that they gave to the community, where the colleagues are or where. And we want to, on a national level, we want to work to retrieve the memory for some of our advocates, colleagues from Mexico. So you have it on our website, of course. We want us to make visible everything that these women gave us, to know each other and to see each other in other women. And because sometimes we do not see what we are doing, but for us it is just essential to strengthen ourselves and to continue making this happen, and also to report gender violence and extra activist violence too. And it is a way for us to demand justice. You can find everything on our website, and you can, of course, download it and use it to keep and continue the dialogue with other territories. Well, I think that Hazel already shared many figures, many data with us regarding, well, the figures, right? The numbers of women murdered, and also figures and regarding the murders, the different projects of extractions in Mexico, for example. We do need to have information. It is our right that we have, but it is more and more complicated for families and the relatives of the victims. They have a very torturous journey to find information about the relatives. So we are acknowledging the efforts of some organizations who are trying to push the government to give information about these disappearances due to the lack of effort from the side of the government. And we have also been monitoring some media and press notes, and we can give them to you, of course, if you wanted. From the beginning of the current term, we have at least 102 people advocate people that have been murdered, according to our following at Educa. And the most recent case is the murder of the advocate and attorney of indigenous communities, Patricia Susana Rivera. So this is just an image of where we are, and also a way to contribute to this data gathering much needed. So for us, it's been really important to take back and to retrieve everything that Betty gave us. Here in Oaxaca, in our organization, in Educa, as many of the organizations in the south of the country, we are working in mega projects, and they are affecting our communities, our villages living in these territories. As I said, we have a great natural diversity. We have water, we have forests, we have lands inhabited by indigenous people. And some people only see these territories as economic profit. In Oaxaca, only in the Central Valleys region, well, in the center of Oaxaca, let's say, we have 8,000 hectares of land tendered to mining activities, without the communities actually living in these lands being informed, not even consulted about this. So we have extremely diverse land and territory, and we are also having these extraction activities that are putting in danger the lives of men, women, and girls living in these territories. And we are talking about a dispute for the natural goods. Doris, maybe we can continue later on with this idea, if you don't mind, so that it is very important. So we'd like to continue with this later on, because we have had a shared experience with Betty, and it's very dear to me and to all of us. But just make a quick pause, and we will continue later on. Thank you. Thank you, Doris.
Dejamos descansar tantito a Doris.
So Doris, you can take a break now, and maybe Sophia can join us so that you will have time to do your presentations. Of course, we are talking about the same issue. Everything is related about this outrageous impunity that we are seeing in this country, where nothing happens, and we have criminals out there without justice. So Sofia is a member of the international group of Miguel Agustin Pro for national rights. Sofia, the floor is yours. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. I'm really happy and pleased to have listened to all of our colleagues talking about human rights. And it's really important for me to listen to you, and I gave you I said you my greetings and great hugs. We need to work in solidarity with all the people disappeared, for the different communities and for the advocates, and we need to acknowledge that those faces are the ones. So there's an echo, so it sound it's not great.
A ver si ya se escucha mejor.
Sí, ya está
Yes,
bien.
the sound's better. Okay, thank you. So when we're talking about security models and the different challenges of security, it has a lot to do with everything that you have already discussed. We have all these spaces that you talked about, our disappeared people, and that are suffering the consequences of this mega project that they are trying to implement in some of our territories. Some of them, sometimes we have these phases. Those are the consequences of this militarized system. From our center, we are really worried about this militarization because it has been the model that has continued in this country, and whose consequences are just lethal for our for human beings. I think we lost.
Sofía, quizás está tratando de que funcione bien la.
Maybe she's trying for the connection to work better, but since we have the echo and now we lost her.
Estas tecnologías no nos ayudan muchas veces.
So technology sometimes make our work easier, but sometimes they make it more difficult.
Quizás mientras Sofía vuelve a reconectarse.
Maybe while we try to get Sofia back, maybe Doris, you can continue with your presentation while we try to get her back with us so that we don't lose time. Okay, so Sofia is there. Okay. So she managed to join it already. I'm sorry. Just technical problems, and we cannot completely get rid of them. I'm sorry, but I'm back. Okay, as I was saying, I wanted to share with you our worries that we are seeing here at Centro Pro in this program of security, this militarized schedule. I wanted to share with you a presentation to show you how we have documented that this security model in this term, this 6 years term, has continued and perpetuated this militarization and also as a consequences on human rights. Please bear with me. I'm just trying to share the presentation with you.
A ver, ahí ya se ve, pero no completa, ¿verdad?
No, sí se ve bien, Sofía.
So now
Perfecto.
you have it.
Sí.
Muchas gracias. Bueno, entonces quizá para empezar decir qué nos
So maybe we can start by defining militarization, right? And we're talking about a security policy that is working for militarization. We can define it in two different ways. So in a direct way and indirect way. So militarization is in a direct way the deployment of armed forces on the streets for public security activities, and also intervening in different aspects of the day-to-day life, not only in security or regarding security, but also other aspects of public life. So this is what we understand as militarization when we first think about it. But we can also see an indirect form of militarization. So it is related to these posts in different spaces of the public life, which are taken by elements coming from forces, or when other spaces or armed forces or other people who are not really part of the armed forces are doing their work or accessing enforced actions. This is another form of militarization. And for example, they are starting to have their own spaces, and they start taking their own decisions. We have also the police, who are having more and more difficult behaviors and more related to the armed forces. And this militarization, the direct militarization that we are seeing more and more in our streets, and participations in public security tasks, and also we are seeing their participation in different areas of the public administration in general. It is important also to highlight the following, because there are other models of security. So we are talking about human rights. We are working for more democratized security models, because our public security, so prevention, and also everything has to do with criminality, with crimes, should be on hands of civil groups, and also attending different problems related to crimes, and human rights should be always in the center. So this is the citizen security model. And we have talked a lot on how this model should be the one that should be put forward, because he is the one who has the less consequences on human rights, of course, and the one who protects them better. And we have another model that we can see, the model of militarized security. It is based on national security, public order, so all these concepts that sometimes need to make categories. So one is the enemy, the other one is an ally, and therefore we have this different, and the consequence is that we see reaction, not prevention, but reaction with force, sometimes lethal force too, and not progressive one. And this is the focus of the militarized security model, completely against civil and security. We're talking about Mexico, but we're talking about Latin America in general. And universally, we have been talking about, well, that the states need to work for a citizen security model and not militarized. But unfortunately, we are really worried about the different aspects of this situation, but nevertheless, we have a regional worry and a national worry. regarding how the armed forces have been privileged in many countries, not only to attend well, the aims that they were created for, such as awards, etc., but also they take part on other activities. It is true that we suffer from terrorism in some countries, or drug trafficking and organized crime, for example, in Mexico. And sometimes they say that when we're talking about migration, we also need armed forces because we need a strong response. Sometimes also they are sent to attend to protests in other countries, on the borders, or poverty issues, etc. But not from a correct point of view. And in the region, we can see how we have seen these armed forces being used not in a right way against the human rights, and not differentiating citizen security and having armed forces only for external risks. Because if we do not do it like that, armed forces are using force, and sometimes are also differentiating between enemy and ally, etc. And we are violating different human rights. So this is a particular problem that is taking place in Mexico, but it is also present in other countries. The consequences of this have been terrible, and not only regarding human rights, as we have already seen in Brazil and Venezuela, etc., also in Colombia, but also regarding the civil and military relation that we have seen in old dictatorships, etc. We have many examples, and we are reinforcing and the consequences to this militarized model. So we have examples, as we said, on other countries. So the Inter-American Court of Human Rights wants to be sure that everything is being taken care of, and they should be ruling against all this, but sometimes some of their articles or clauses are being dismissed. So I would like to highlight just some of them, two of them. So the court said that citizen security cannot be based on the use of the force, trying to make the civil population as an enemy, but it has to protect and control them. When we say that citizen security or civil security can be based on the use of force, we are talking about it from the point of view of the security, from the point of view of militaries and from the armed forces. And it was a declaration from a case of Venezuela, but it was also repeated in a case against Mexico in Atenco. We had a great analysis on the use of force and how the police here in Mexico needed just to comply with their tasks regarding the use of force, and sometimes, well, they don't. And the most recent sentence of the war against drug trafficking with the case Alvarado, with our colleagues from Sedmen in the north, they say that we have, well, there are different organisms and procedures and groups on human rights. They agree that the participation of armed forces as legal police can be contrary to the principles of the state of right, as division of powers, independence, and autonomy of legal courts, and subordination to civil authorities. And then, afterwards, I will say how we have these principles that exceptionally can be used by them, by armed forces, when we're talking about a civil security. And according to human rights, of course. We'll say that in a minute. So everything is about framing the militarization of security in Mexico and different worries of
that has generated
in Mexico
concern in authorities. It's been the subject of recommendations from international bodies. Now we're going to look specifically at how this has taken place in the Mexican case. Without going into great detail, we should say that this is not a new problem. And those who are listening today, I'm sure, are aware the presence of military personnel in the country has been a reality for many years now. We can highlight the role of the military in the so-called dirty war, in which they generated enormous violations of human rights, which continue in impunity. And in more recent years, we've seen how there's a schema of security based on that they have continued to maintain the armed forces doing security tasks within the country. I'm sorry, Sofia, you only have 5 minutes. We're going to let you finish. I see that clearly, okay. So they have been present over years. There's a principal peak in 2006 when they deployed the armed forces in the context of the war against narco traffic, but then it was maintained throughout the period until 2018 with the law of internal security, and now it has generated a series of decisions in the present government. I'm not going to focus on this, but it is important to highlight that when 2006 the armed forces were deployed, there was not a justification for this deployment. In fact, the level of homicides were quite low, and that has increased since the deployment of the armed forces. At present, it has maintained a stable level of homicides without diminution, without reduction. This is evidence that this has been ineffective in generating any human security. We have been able to document profound violations of human rights, sexual torture of women, institutions like the armed forces. It's very high risk that women are subjected to sexual torture and disappearances. These very alarming and arbitrary executions, especially under previous administrations. We've seen that these take place continually in supposed conflicts, but we have ample evidence that this is the ongoing practice of the armed forces. There's great concern regarding this model of security from the United Nations and other organizations. The principal issue is recognizing who are the faces of the people that are suffering the consequences of this deployment of the armed forces. Because of this use of force, this categorization of the other as the enemy, that has this tremendous impact upon human rights. Here are some of the faces of people that have achieved sentences in the Inter-American Court. Inés and Valentina, who are indigenous women who suffered sexual torture at the hands of the armed forces, or women that have denounced the disappearance of family members at the hands also of the armed forces. They should not participate in security activities, and were they to do so, it should be fulfilling certain requisites and only in circumstances, extraordinary circumstances, regulated and controlled such that there are independent procedures to guarantee the correct use of the armed forces. None of this is presently active. Recent cases have demonstrated that the armed forces continue to be active in civil security activities, and there's now the National Guard as the principal, which is made up of military elements, and there's evidence that it is completely rooted in the Secretariat of National Defense, and these have transferred the command and the operative command. This is a militarized institution. To not overstep the time allotted to me too much, I do want to remind you that these are people who have suffered these human rights violations that confront the very worst face of the militarized security services in terms of arbitrary detention, sexual torture. One of the resistance of these militarized bodies to any kind of accountability. They're accustomed to opacity, and there's a great deal of concern recently in how they intervene in order to not be held accountable. They have a direct role in demanding that they not be held accountable. They erect a series of mechanisms to guarantee their impunity, and there's no adequate control. There are no internal controls within the National Guard. It receives thousands of complaints. The external controls might be the international human rights boards, but they have completely ignored these entities and their claims regarding the human rights. And it is in this context that we are ever more concerned with the increasing role of the militarized armed forces in security tasks. They establish what are the requisites, at the same time, they transfer all of the resources associated with the National Guard, its regional deployment, its activity in customs, in against protests, surveillance, which is especially serious. The armed forces are categorizing, for example, human rights activities as they have a completely anti-human rights vision of Mexican society. And this institution that sees human rights organizations in this light is being given space to, is given competencies in precisely the control of civil organizations. the decision of to not appear before Congress, far from being willing to be held accountable. They are characterized by extreme opacity.
Podríamos parar un poquito aquí.
Could we stop a moment here, Sophia? Yes, okay. Thank you.
Gracias, Sofía.
Thank you, Sophia.
Quedaron pendientes unas
We have still pending a final word from Evangelina, from Hazel, and from Doris. If you'd like to draw your conclusions so that the participants can ask their questions or make comments. Angelina, did you want to speak? I'd just like to say that we have to finish in 15 minutes. In 15 minutes, we have to close. Yes, that's correct, Edme. Yes, we're aware of that. Thank you. Evangelina, did you want to say something, add a final word? Perhaps 2 minutes? Let's allow the other companions to come to their conclusions. Hazel, would you like to say a few words? Well, just very briefly, I'd like to thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to be here. I'm very grateful to have listened to Doris, Sofia, and Evangelina. And let's turn our gaze and look at what is happening here. And especially try to resolve these issues of violence. I'll pass the rest of my time to my companions or to questions. Doris, would you like to say a last word? We know that Betty was especially involved in issues of extractivism.
Sí, breve. Pues
Very
quisiera
briefly, I would like to say that here in Oaxaca, like in other parts of the South and other states in Mexico, we are in a context of in which we are being stripped by extractive projects. This is a mural we were working on with women in the Central Valleys. They wanted to highlight this dispute over their territory. It's a territory inhabited not only by the women, but also by men and children and other elements of this territory. And against this, all of the death and devastation of these mining projects. There have been mining concessions made to major mining companies. These operations have caused terrible devastation in these territories. I think Betty was a very important driver of this movement and the political participation of women. So from that spirit, or in that spirit, we've been accompanying organizational processes in the valleys and other regions that make clear the alliances between peoples and communities, territories around the impact when a mining project impacts the quality of the water or the explosions and the dust that their work produces that's scattered throughout the whole region and is not limited to the area where they have received the concession. These are important positions that can be visibilized, mobilized what women are doing in terms of providing for their communities, but also contributing to the processes of territorial defense. Right now, the work that Hazel and Evangelina are doing. So that's where we've been deeply involved in the tasks. The access of the communities, generating the state is doing, not only at this moment, but throughout over history, it's worked hand in hand with the corporations, as well as many other regional sectors. In Oaxaca specifically, these are not only the politicians that have worked with economic actors. In this context, security for women who are in their villages and the men that live in these villages is essential. We say loud and clear, we don't want any more of our companions assassinated. We need to generate conditions that allow us to defend our communities and our territories, that are safe and have access to justice. These are not in personal or individual terms. People that position themselves against the mining contracts do so collectively as an assembly, form a whole community that states clearly that they do not want this project in their territory. This is a collective way of caring for the territory. In terms of violence and security and organized crime, all of this issue, the role of the military in these regions, it becomes much more complex in contexts like those of Oaxaca, in which projects, mining and hydrological projects are eager to access our territories. These laws, the presence of the military, all work to defend and promote the development of this kind of extractivist projects. Thank you, Doris. Sophia, please go ahead. Maybe let's open the floor to questions. So this is a mosaic, a very complex one that all our companions here have presented, have laid before us today. And it's an opportunity to get to know each other and to contact those other persons that are participating in this seminar. Would anyone like to ask a question or make a comment? We're so overwhelmed by such monstrosities that we can't even speak. Maria, I think maybe you can. We only have 5 minutes left, so maybe you can. Yes. This situation is really troubling. The treatment of the family members of disappeared persons, it's inhuman. There are examples every day that express this failure of a sensitivity, of attention with regard to the disappeared. This example that Peña Nieto said at some point with regard to the companions from Ayotzinapa with that issue of historical truth. And Peña Nieto said something about, well, yeah, we'll turn the page, we'll move on. And he doesn't realize that we are with people, that these are people, and that these are people who are living and experiencing the disappearance of their beloved family members. There are some collectives that up to 30 years would be necessary in order to recover all these different to recover all the different family members and recognize them, identify them. The issue of militarization is not discussed it's not a question of the past. It's right in front of our nose right now. It's a really critical situation that we're facing now because it overwhelms us. And with the situation of the legislative and judicial bodies and the executive body, these are the legislative and judicial bodies are subject to the executive body, and when things are being questioned, those they say that they're conservative, that we're not in the same situation. They undervalue what society is saying, what it is demanding, and this prevention and defense of the rights that we possess. This seminar, its objective, its goal is the visibilization of all of what's happening in our country through companions, through persons that are at the very head of these movements, accompanying affected persons. And we hope that all of this can be resolved. In the case of Yiri, he was a Finnish companion, and in Europe and the European community, he was not, that was not paid attention to, nor the torture of the companions in Atenco. All of these issues are still pending. There's so much still pending. There's so much impunity. We have to continue the fight, aware that we have to fight against so many threats that surround us with these armed forces that have handed the country, that they have handed the country to them. And there's a internal war going on that has not been recognized as a war, but that we feel it and recognize it in every corner of Mexico. As some of our companions in another seminar reminded us, despite the circumstances, we have to continue onward, having hope and joy in the efforts that we undertake. As Evangelina said, with regard to the difficulties and the obstacles, she continues to be present. She's still at the front line of the struggle. I'd like to say a few words of thanks to all of those that have participated, to our panelists today, also to the panelists of the two previous webinars, and to our translators, and to the organization, especially wide, because they have, Myers has helped us so much in the technical coordination of these webinars and everything else. I'd like to remind you that this is an effort to discuss the consequences of these agreements, these Euro-Mexican agreements, and also to look at what we can do together about it. We invite you to sign this letter that we've shared. This is a small initiative within our networks, and we want to move forward with any measures we can. Thank you very much. Let us continue in contact. Thank you so much to all of the participants in the seminar, those who have participated throughout the 3 sessions, and those who have participated in whichever they were able to. Our great thanks to all of you. And we continue, companions, in the struggle. That's it. Thank you very much. Thank you all. And thank you for the opportunity to be here with you all. It's really a pleasure to participate in this seminar. I couldn't participate in the previous ones, but because I've been very busy, but I look forward to participating in other spaces that you organize. And thank you to all of the companions that were here. A great embrace of solidarity to all of you. Thank you. Thank you. It's been a pleasure to meet you all, albeit remotely, and to share this little moment with you all.